Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining. Hey, Nyla, seeing you in the chat, calling you out. Nice to see you. So we have 14 attendees. If you're just joining, welcome. I'm Callie. I am the head of marketing at Workit Health, and I am here to introduce our amazing panel. I'm so excited to put this panel together, and I've been inspired by all of these women through a lot of my recovery. So really excited to hear what they have to say. If you don't know what Workit Health is, we are a digital addiction care provider. So you can check us out online at workithealth.com. And we have events that are monthly live on Zoom. And so always register, and then we'll email you afterwards with the info. So I will hand it over to Liv if you want to introduce yourself, and then have the panelists introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Callie. I am Liv Pennelle. I go by she, her. I am a person in long-term recovery. I'm also a writer and an MSW candidate, and I'm stoked to be here. So I want to hand it over to the others. Shari, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. My name is Shari Hampton. I am a nonprofit founder of Serve It Sober. I am also a speaker, a recovery coach. I also work with the She Recovers Foundation. I am a woman, she, her, hers in long-term recovery, and just thrilled to be here, anxious to get started. Just an honor to be with so many fantastic panelists. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Shari. Amy?
Hi, I am Amy Reed. I am also in long-term recovery, she, her, and I am an author. I mostly write young adult fiction. I've written a lot of nonfiction about recovery and mental health issues and trauma and how all of those things intersect. And I'm really excited to be here.
Excited you're here. Anne?
Thank you, Liv. My name is Doset Johnston, and I'm in long-term recovery. I'm she, her. I'm the author of Drink, The Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol, and I'm also a psychotherapist. And I'm thrilled to be here today.
Thanks, Anne. Lisa?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Lisa McLaughlin. I'm one of the co-founders of Workit Health with my partner, Robin McIntosh. I'm a licensed social worker and an information scientist. So I have a technology background and then a clinical background. And in my day-to-day job at Workit, I do a lot of our clinical research work with our clinical teams, as well as things like this, telling the world about our work, which is digital recovery services.
Thanks, Lisa. So why don't we just start with the small question of what recovery looks like to you? Who would like to go first? Shari, I'm going to pick on you.
I see. What does recovery mean to me? You know, I think the one word that comes to light for me is possibility. And, you know, I had heard a story once of a person that had lived a wonderful life and actually ended up speaking to someone in their afterlife, and they were shown all these boxes that had been unopened, and they were all the possibilities that they hadn't gotten to. And so I think that for me, when I think about recovery, it's really just a sense of possibility and what I'm able to do. Having been 6.5, well, not quite 6.5 years clean and sober, but that's the word that comes up for me is possibility, and how I'm able to expand, you know, life in such a big and gracious way. So I would say that that's what it means for me.
Thanks, Shari. I love how expansive that definition is. Amy?
I think the meaning has really changed over time. And for me right now, I think it means growth, and it means healing, and it means deeply understanding the phenomenon of craving and all the ways that it manifests in my life. I think once you kind of maybe aren't so ruled by that acute craving of whatever substance you're addicted to, you have the opportunity to examine how it manifests in all aspects of your life. And so in long-term recovery, that's something that I really work on, is just like, how am I chasing pleasure and how am I avoiding pain, and how can I be more present in the moment that I'm in right now, and how can I access my higher self? And so really that's what kind of recovery is for me these days, is just like becoming in tune with my best inner wisdom.
That's so lovely. Lisa?
Yeah, this has changed a lot for me too. So I relate to the evolution. I would have said like 15 years ago, it was a state of abstinence, of not using drugs and alcohol. But today I very much identify recovery as a state of consciousness and a mindset of growth and of embodying myself. I think that's the biggest thing, is that when I started a recovery journey, I felt very disembodied, and I saw myself as like just following these instincts or cravings, like Amy was mentioning. And now my quest for recovery is really a quest to like inhabit myself eventually. And I think that's kind of a lifelong journey for many of us.
Thanks, Lisa. I love how everyone's describing recovery as a verb, that it's an action. Anne?
I love that too. As a word person, I'm really appreciating that. My recovery is really a state of grace. And so that's not a verb. It is, I've been able to realize a lot of dreams in the 13 years that I've been relieved from craving. And that has been miraculous. It really is a state of grace. I will say, not to rain on everybody's parade, raining on mine, I guess, that I have been very aware that of the whack-a-mole reality, that as my relief from cravings for alcohol were apparent, it shifted into other elements of my life, most starkly right now, workaholism. And so I have to be vigilant, and I have to be aware on a daily basis of what for me was the entry drug, which was working too hard.
Which is kind of hard in this profession because it's so intertwined with your personal life too, right?
Yes, in our culture, it's rewarded. I think it's the one drug that we reward.
Yeah, agreed. I'm curious. So we called this panel "There Being No Wrong Way to Recover." What does that phrase mean to folks? And anyone, feel free to chime in.
Well, I would say, Liv, that you're one of the people who taught me about life beyond just the 12-step definition of recovery through some of the movements that you've been a part of. And I think historically there has been this sense that it's been really hard to jump over basically very few people got into abstinence-based recovery, and that was like the dominant definition of the way to recover for probably like 100 years or longer. And then there were people like myself who got in that boat and have stayed in that boat, coming on 19 years. But very much over time, started to feel like the 1% in that boat, like the definition wasn't wide enough. The tent wasn't wide enough for everyone's diverse experiences of trying to move towards growth. And sometimes like the ideologies or frameworks that people have used, like certain recovery systems, changed for people as they've evolved in their thinking. And so now there's all these other ways of thinking about what does it mean to recover. And some of that comes from the harm reduction community, wanting to include people that are on their way to their version of thriving. So it may not mean ever being abstinent from anything. It might just mean being, more conscious of their use, or have tools or coaching or something to help them. But one of the things I think has been interesting as these definitions have expanded is watching those communities shape themselves and create these new definitions that are more inclusive, which I think is really good in a time period where a lot of people are feeling unincluded and left out and unseen and unheard. And so I think it's been like a really healthy movement, and the idea that there's no wrong way to recover is super, super welcoming and inclusive, and I think a good thing.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. Shari, I see lots of nodding.
Yeah, I was really engrossed in what Lisa was saying. I want to make sure now I got the question. So the question is, what does no wrong way to recover mean to me?
Exactly.
Okay. A couple of things. I can think of a number of phrases that come to mind. Obviously allowing people, meeting people where they are. And I guess the other thing that comes to mind for me is people need to stay in their lane. You know what I mean? It's like there are so many people that have an opinion about how other people recover. And, if you're thinking more about how other people recover, your recovery game might need more attention than you realize. And so I think it's just allowing people to have their own experience that's not shaded or colored by anyone else, and being able to own that boldly, and giving people the permission and the space to do that, I think is kind of how that rings true for me.
I love that. And particularly in light of what I'm going to ask you next, but I wanted to see if anybody else wanted to come in about this particular phrase.
Yeah, I just want to say that we all become addicts for different reasons. And so it makes sense that we would all come to recovery in diverse ways as well, right? And that our recovery has to match the unique healing that each individual needs. And I think a lot of people on this panel are really informed by trauma work, right? And for me, that is absolutely essential in my recovery. And it wasn't something that I think was really thought about too much by the folks who designed, the 12 steps. And there are a lot of things that weren't thought about in that wisdom that we have a deeper understanding of now. And there are so many different ways that we can address those things, and they're not all addressed in the same place. There are systemic things that have to be addressed in our recovery sometimes. There are various marginalizations, and there is so much that that we have to just kind of find our own way to work with. And a cookie cutter approach that was designed by white men, 100 years ago, isn't always going to be the best approach for all of us.
Anne, what do you think?
I think it boils down to one question, which is, instead of asking what's wrong with that woman, saying what happened to that woman. And trauma, I did trauma work from the beginning and was very aware that my work and depression led me into my affliction. I call it my affliction. And so, yes, I agree with everything that's been said, but trauma with a capital T is core to what I look at.
I love that we're discussing trauma. I mean, I recovered in England mostly, for the first 5 years, and it was only 12-step in the northwest of England. It's moving to America that I get to do these things, which is why I'm so passionate about writing and advocating for there being no wrong way. So speaking of no wrong way, what do people think about all of the backlash with Demi Lovato saying that she ascribes to the term Cali sober?
Can you define that really quick?
So Cali sober means to be sober within their definition. So it could be, it's technically a definition of harm reduction. So, you know, someone might abstain from the substance that caused them harm, but moderate something else. So for example, Cali sober is traditionally that they will abstain from alcohol but might smoke pot. But it really depends on what their definition is. I know that Demi had said that she moderates drinking and smokes weed. And it's received, the reason I asked this question is because it's received a lot of backlash within the recovery community and among treatment providers. So I was curious, I thought this was a timely panel to get people's perspectives on it. Lisa, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so it's so funny because if I answered this question 10 years ago, I would have said it was just bullshit, you know. The whole thing, I would have been like, this is not useful. I mean, I was such an extremist with this stuff, and I've come so far from my former self with it that it's interesting to hear my own answers now to what I think. But I think it's great if it's a label that people can identify with and connect to, who are at that state of connecting to moderating in a new way, and make moderating sexy to them or somehow like desirable. I think it's positive. And I guess this gets to my reasoning for that is that over time, I've come to see like addiction itself as more of like this like big constellation of underlying conditions that's not like the top of the iceberg is like the drinking and the alcohol, right? Or like these like symptoms. But I'm really of the philosophy that all these behaviors are really like, you know, medicating yourself from underlying conditions, not just trauma, but like sensory processing disorder, like all sorts of things. People, for myself, ADHD, for lots of people, lots of different things. But the more we can see that like constellation of underlying things that are going on with people that lead to them being triggered and using substances in certain ways, like the better. And I see that those new labels as ways for people to start to look at their own use more consciously. And so then understand it more consciously, right? Because what addiction, I feel like the form I had thrived on was like non-consciousness. It was like, I don't know what's happening. I'm on like this movie's playing of my own life and I can't stop it. And I have no real active role. And I see all of these things like dry January, all these like sober November, whatever these things are that are attractive to people as ways of like attempting to like look at your stuff, look at how you feel about where you're at. And I see them as all gravy. And I don't know, I'm excited for a future where there's lots of different terms for lots of different phases that people are into.
Yeah, and I think as was mentioned before, like nobody has a right to define somebody else's recovery or sobriety or anything. And it just seems like whatever a person can do to cause less harm to themselves and others, that's a win, right? And maybe that path will lead to someone else. And maybe, you know, it's not for us to say. I think any choice that a person is making to have a clearer, more like holistically healthy approach to their life is a good, wholesome thing. And ultimately it's an individual deciding for themselves, like what those things mean to them and what feels true and what feels like the right growth for them.
Agreed. Shari, do you want to say anything on this?
You know, just simply echoing what Amy and Lisa said, I absolutely, I mean, I'm a big fan of hers anyway. And, you know, I watched the interview a couple of times, and I think the word that came up for me is that she felt that she was such a prisoner. And that there's now this sense of empowerment, which I think goes hand in hand with recovery. You know, as long as you begin to feel empowered. And she was empowered to make her own choices, right? And so what I think really, you know, I'm from California, so Cali Sober works for me anyway. But I love the fact that she can clearly define for herself what works and what doesn't work. Just simply put, what works, what doesn't work. And I think as her recovery develops, just like as my recovery's developed, I'm a different person today than I was when I was 30 days out. You know, 30 days out, I was counting every single day. You know, I was very rigid because I was afraid. I was guarding my recovery so carefully. And I think when you gate yourself in, you gate some stuff out. And so I think as her recovery grows, her recovery will shift, just like all of ours has shifted. And you don't know, she may go from seeing the thing and being able to see more things in a different way. And I think we have to give her, and I say this all the time, we have to give people permission to live their own journey. And for me to try to stifle that or to step on that or to course correct it, I think is just inappropriate. And so I love that she's defining it for herself. I think it gives other people permission to do the same thing, which is define their own recovery. And I'm all for it. I'm here for it. I'm definitely here for it.
I feel so warm inside. Anne, what do you think?
I think I'm opening my mind to, I guess I'm very humbled at the moment because I feel that we, as has been said, we all define our journey. And so I'm very open-minded and very, I would agree that, 13 years ago, I was in 12-step and have evolved and am still evolving. So I guess the question I always have is, what are you numbing? Goes back to the trauma question. What are you numbing? And if you're not numbing, it's sort of a personal barometer for me. And it's an interesting question. So I'm open-minded.
Thank you, Anne. And I too wanted to reflect what Lisa had said, that I was of that more polarized perspective initially, because that's how I recovered, and I saw that as a protective mechanism over my recovery, and anything that was different was a threat. And I think as you mature in your recovery, you see that things are less of a threat. It's my personal perspective. So speaking of inclusivity, I'm curious how you all think we could be more inclusive within the recovery community, whether that is, making space for people who might feel that there is a barrier to recovery for them. We know that stigma is a huge barrier to recovery. We know that people of colour face huge barriers towards recovery. I'm just curious what you all think about how we can be more inclusive, either within our platforms or within the spaces we inhibit in recovery, however that kind of sits with you.
I have a ton of thoughts about this. I think from a treatment perspective and also from a personal perspective. I think from a treatment perspective, we have to make it more affordable. One of the reasons why I work so hard with Served Up Sober is to kind of create more health equity to holistic services, because I think that a lot of times 12-step isn't for everybody. And a lot of people are looking for different ways to recover. And so I think being able to increase access to various services, specifically holistic services, I think is a great way to kind of break down some barriers. From a personal perspective, being invited isn't always being included. You know what I mean? I think one of the things that I've appreciated with your work, and you and I have worked on some things before, is I really feel included in the process. You know, it's more than just you saying, hey, I'm inviting you to this and I want you to do that. I really feel included in the way you think about something. And so I think that what happens with people of color is that they're invited to a lot of things, but they don't really feel included. I think we have to do a better job of that. How do we really embrace who you are culturally, who you are sometimes spiritually, who you are in terms of your experiences? I think we have to do a better job of that. I really do, especially, you know, since there's so much going on racially, and racism is trauma, right? And I think we have to be able to embrace people of color in a different way, in a more authentic way, that really, really includes their experiences. And so when we do that, I think that the recovery space opens wide up for people of color. And I'm excited about that possibility.
Thank you, Shari. I love what you've done in the recovery space, and I love how accessible your holistic recovery supports are. You know, I think it's incredible, and thank you. Does anyone else want to come in?
I have thoughts on this because I think working for an organization that's delivering harm reduction services in the Midwest has been an odyssey for me in terms of understanding inclusion and exclusion. I very much, when I started Workit in California, where there was like a lot of harm reduction services, is very kind of normal to do holistic, meet people where they are kind of things. And then I brought Workit back to Michigan, to like the Detroit metro area, where it was way less normal. And we're like friends who I, had gotten sober with, that's where I got sober in AA. And so I was very much like personally ostracized from my own communities when I made the decision to start working on Workit. And there was a lot of subtle forms of exclusion, but there were a lot of really direct, like, if we did an initiative, like the next day there would be an initiative that was like, real, truly sober people are unicorns and they're real. Basically saying like, you're promoting non-real recovery. And so we're going to come back at that just so people know that real recovery is out there and it's achievable. And I think the harm in that didn't dawn on me for like a good 5-6 years into that, where now I'm like, that was cruel. And not just, that was like, to Shari's point, a gating that people do in the beginning when they need the rigidity, but a gating that had become cruel. And if you're doing the harm reduction pathway in the Midwest, for a long time, it was considered trashy. Like, you're not doing real recovery, like whatever you're doing, you're a pill mill or you're dealing drugs if you're not doing it the real way. And that was like against the science, none of those things mattered, because that model had grown for so long uncontested in so many aspects of life. And so for me, it was truly painful to, see it working, like to have thousands of people in Workit and see how well they're doing and how rich their lives are and how comprehensive their recovery is. And then have to go out to community events and have people, say, well, you guys still doing that drug pushing thing? Or, like the cognitive dissonance got so loud, and it's still there till today. Like, so even if I go to partner, like with county health departments or different areas, there's always well, why don't you guys work with people in human trafficking? Like, what you're doing is fringe. And so why don't we put you in the like fringe bucket, and the people that you're treating as really unwell, and you can deal with those people that are like really far from normal, as opposed to what you're doing is so science-based, is effective. Oh my God, it's working so well for this large number of people. Let's celebrate this and like get behind it. And that's honestly been kind of excruciating. But it's also been interesting myself to evolve from myself feeling sort of colonized by my own recovery experience, and then coming to a point where like I actually embrace the model that we're building, and now it's my dominant form of recovery. Like, I do Workit courses every day. Like, that wasn't true even 3 years ago. I was running this organization, but still kind of like, oh, am I being bad? Am I am I somehow not real in my recovery anymore? I had this like major Velveteen Rabbit moment in the past like year or so, and it feels really freeing.
I love that. I love how honest you are too. Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I have to say that what happened to me was I came out with drink in 2013, and the recovery group that I was part of refused to speak to me, ostracized me, and punished me for recovering out loud. And I was totally isolated and lost. And I have to say that in the past decade, 8 to 10 years, what has been remarkable is we've seen a huge recovery movement, largely female-led, and things have really changed. So I think we're in the middle of quite a remarkable trajectory. And I'm loving hearing the openness of, and the open-mindedness and the generosity of the opinions of this panel. And it warms my heart to hear Shari and Lisa and speak on this question. And so I think things are really changing quickly. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Anne. Amy?
I think you mentioned stigma when you asked your question, and I think like the biggest thing is just like Anne was saying, like recovering out loud. Like we don't have anything to be ashamed of, and our recovery is such an asset and such an amazing thing to share. And I've just found in being very open about my recovery, I've been able to like affect a lot of change, and like that's the only way, that's how like so many people find their way, is because of that one person who is open. And it's not, you know, this dirty little secret, and it's something that we can talk about and we can celebrate, and it will make people more curious and want to try. And something that Shari said about just like shifting the way that treatment centers talk about programs, and like offering more options than just 12-step, because there are so many amazing, really well-established fellowships out there. There's like Smart Recovery, which is totally secular. There are Buddhist recovery programs like Recovery Dharma that's really inclusive. And there are just so many different ways that people can recover. And for so many of us, like treatment is our first, you know, introduction to all of those. And so if we're given all of these different options, and we're really given like, you know, the science-based holistic therapeutic experience, then we can have choice and we can make empowered choices that fit our needs.
Thanks, Amy. I think it's a really interesting point that I was gonna ask, you know, what are some of the ways that we, building off those answers, what are some of the ways that we can promote these non-traditional or alternative pathways of recovery? But it's interesting that we use the words non-traditional and alternative, because are they? You know, is it alternative to go to Recovery Dharma, or, you know, to go through a process of harm reduction? You know, in fact, I think all recovery should be viewed through a lens of harm reduction. One thing I think would be helpful here is, you know, we're all outspoken women who share our recovery and share how we've evolved our open-mindedness and supported others. I'm curious if we could give people that are listening or watching some kind of tangible ways to promote these pathways of recovery, all pathways of recovery.
Well, one way that I can think of is I really get on my soapbox about the criminal justice system, because that was how I got sober. So I got sober through the courts and court-ordered AA, and I was a white woman, right? So I had a certain kind of experience of doing that. And at every point, there was all of these special affordances that were offered to me in that process. And the people I was drinking and getting high with that were African-American had in the same car had completely different outcomes in their rehab process and in their probation experience and all of those pieces. And one thing that's really painful for me looking back at that is many of the decisions and many of the court-ordered services that were offered to me at the time were very subjective. And at the time, there were peers in the community that determined whether or not you stayed on probation and continued on with a normal life or whether you went to jail. And I think that that's hugely problematic. Like that a subjective community in any one ideology, whether it's SMART or harm reduction, or has the power of to like make decisions of state, which are really decisions around incarceration. And that's one area where I think there just needs to be more love and more empathy and more inclusion and more separation of the community-based models that work for some people and real consequences in whether or not people get locked up. Like I would like to see a complete medicalization of the condition of addiction. Like I think we still talk about it. Like even when we mention the word trauma, we talk about it like people screwing up and making mistakes. And like there's some underlying piece of trauma that's like you got broken. I don't really see recovery that way anymore. I see it as like you were responding to undiagnosed symptoms. You were responding to potentially trauma in your environment, but that doesn't mean that you broke or you, it doesn't necessarily have to mean still that there's this connotation of bad. And I think we in the court system still have a very corrupt, really disturbing system that leads to very different outcomes for different people. And I would like to see it change. I would love to see harm reduction services included for people after they get arrested, especially because a lot of them have no interest whatsoever in using abstinence-based services. We're like jamming them down their throat. I think that that is just cruel and ineffective and like wrong. Okay, end of rant. But
oh, I'm with you. I am with you. I think it'd be interesting if we had more social workers involved in that process, because I'm curious how the medicalization of it, given the lack of education that doctors, the majority of doctors have around substance use disorder, and the stigmatization that they can potentially cause harm with. I think it'd be interesting to see like a dual social worker. It's just my social worker values coming out. What do other people think about how we could promote alternative pathways?
You know, it would really be cool if there was, and I know I am on the board for NAATP and their diversity and inclusion and equity committee. And they're kind of an organization that provides resources to treatment. But I think it would be awesome, and I don't know if this exists, but if there was actually a way to invite leaders of the alternative communities, right? And so I think what happens when you get into treatment, everybody that works there, from the clinical director down to the volunteer, usually use a 12-step method to recover. And so that's really the only thing they know how to push. I think there needs to be some more intention put on bringing in diverse people and different thought patterns and different, I mean, really, really getting down to the nuts and bolts of saying, okay, we need to have people on staff that recover differently. And until you do that, you don't really open it up for people to have a different experience. I've worked in a treatment facility, and there were so many women there who really were turned off by 12-step because of their experiences with some of the men there. And they begged us, do I have to go to this 12-step meeting? And they were required to go to a 12-step meeting 3 times a week. And this was the only 12-step meeting that was available to them. And it was just a tragic situation because they weren't given an alternate choice. And I think that comes from not having people that are in key positions that have recovered in alternate ways. And so I think when we do a better job of actually bringing those people in so that you have a person that recovered through Recovery 2.0 or Women for Sobriety or Smart Recovery or whatever, that can actually speak to the clients and say, listen, this is the way that I did it, and this may be something that resonates with you. So I think when we start doing a better job of bringing in a more diverse group of workers, that it will trickle down eventually to the clients. That's what I'd like to see. More diversity in the workplace.
I agree. And I think it'd be also interesting to encourage people who work within the field to, and I know this is common among social workers, but to actually reflect on their own privilege in that situation. You know, how is my privilege impacting my suggestions for this person? You know, is that the right pathway for them? I think that would be really helpful. Amy or Anne?
I think, you know, just thinking on a practical level, like I've done some of these kind of like lunch and learn sort of things with treatment centers where they'll invite people from like non-traditional sort of paths to come and like educate the clinicians. And I think there are a lot of places that really want to learn. They want to know how to give their clients more options, and they just don't know about them yet. And so I think that like really reaching out to these places and offering to come in and like talk about what you're doing and give them materials that they can give to their clients, and just sort of spread the word that way can be like a really sort of organic way to start making connections and building community.
Yeah, I had the privilege of going to rehab in the States at a place that was really stringent about exposing us to alternate ways of recovering. And I started a Women for Sobriety group, and I think that I couldn't agree more with what has been said, that the diversity of approaches is really key.
Thanks, Anne. I'm curious, we've got a few minutes left before we go to questions. So I thought a nice wrap-up question might be, what are your hopes for the recovery landscape over the next 10 years?
I think a lot of us have said the word holistic a lot. And I think that's the first thing that comes to mind, where we look at recovery really as a whole person experience. And we bring in all of the things that need healing, you know, because they're all interconnected. It's not just about the substance that we used the most, right? It's about what drives us to do that, and what drove us in the first place to seek solace in that, and how we work with our survival mechanisms, and how we move beyond surviving into, you know, healing and thriving in our lives. And yeah, that's my short answer.
Thanks, Amy.
For me, I agree with that holistic piece. I would push it even further to say, like, I want the full gamut of services to be available for people, like everything from, like, I'm learning so much from like doing genetic testing about what made me vulnerable to addiction. Like I can't absorb B vitamins, thus I can't modulate stress very well. So that probably wasn't a good thing to have going into adolescence. Things like that are increasingly coming out, or we're starting to find out from genetics testing that certain people have a higher likelihood of getting addicted to certain medications. So they are embedding that information in what they give people after, say, like a hip replacement or something like that. And we just didn't have that information before, because we saw all of this addictive behavior as like sin in some way. So we weren't looking at it very medically, because we were looking at it as like a spiritual or more of a soul problem than a like mind, body, and spirit problem. Like everything in life really kind of has all of those pieces, I guess. But I think the underdeveloped piece is the real, like the science of the physical aspects. Because I always struggled early on in sobriety. My brother has schizophrenia. And so when I was embedded in a community that was super anti-psychiatry, it wasn't working for me, because I was like, no matter what my brother does with the steps, his refrigerator will still be talking to him tonight. And it doesn't really matter what his relationship is with his higher power. It never will. And so I had to protect myself very much in early days of understanding my own need for psychiatry. And I found, like, over the years, that the people that I know that, like, I'm coming up on 19 years, the people that I know who are still well, they got their psychiatric needs met. They found a great therapist, a great medical doctor, and they got that piece taken care of. And I would like to see that kind of ubiquitously part of the like normal pathway. In addition to the, like, I believe in spiritual growth, and all those things are great, but some of us are up against very serious difficulty regulating mood, emotion, all those things. And so my hope is that we'll get, like, a lot smarter, to the point where people have this, like, incredible experience where, like, recipes from your Liv's Recovery Kitchen, like, get pushed to people. So they have all of the things they can do to, like, not only fix their brain chemistry, but, like, regulate their emotions by eating healthier food, thus getting less triggered. I just think that piece has, like, worlds of discovery that are going to come in the next couple of years that are going to really change how we even have these kind of conversations.
I think that's a really fascinating point, and I can, well, I agree. And I'd like to see equity in that situation. I having come from a socialized country, whether socialized healthcare, and then here, how is everyone going to get access to that care? And I want to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, 80% of our care is, like, Medicaid. And so we do this completely unsustainable, in a completely unsustainable way through.
That's why I love Workit.
But the idea is, like, over time, like, you use the technology to make it cheaper so that you can give it to people for nothing, essentially, and have it covered by health insurance, because it's a normal medical care need. And we're getting there. We're getting there.
Thanks to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Others? Shari? What do you hope for the recovery landscape?
Two words come to mind for me, and it's cultural competence. I think that, just to speak to what Lisa was saying about being in the same car and having a different experience than some of the people that were in the car with you in terms of your sentencing or in terms of what you were offered. I think that, let's say that people of color are offered treatment, and they are. I'm not saying that they're not, but if they get into a treatment situation and there's no cultural competence there, how much do they really get out of it? And so I think what I would like to see in treatment is just that we become more culturally aware. And then we just do a better job. We just naturally do a better job of understanding where people are, how they got where they are, how to help them get from where they are. We just have a better framework to start from. So for me, 2 words, cultural competence. I think we can do a much better job with that. I'd love to see that grow in the recovery space, even with coaches, not just treatment. You can look at the field of coaching. Yeah, that's a big word, big 2 words, cultural competence for me.
Some very necessary words. Anne?
It's so interesting what Lisa said, because as a Canadian, we have access to more psychiatry, more supports. And for me, I was diagnosed with bipolar early in my recovery, and it was like a twin set. All the pieces fell together and made sense. And getting all of me treated was essential. And as a psychotherapist, I work with many women in early recovery, trying to help them put the pieces together. And Lisa, I could just hug you for what you said. It was essential. Essential. I couldn't agree more.
We all need to get to Canada, Anne.
Yes.
Yeah, but she's in Palm Springs right now.
Only briefly. I'm a Canadian.
I'm coming to Toronto.
Good.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our questions. We've got one question from an attendee, and I want to encourage others. We've got 10 minutes left if you want to add any into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So the first question is, I feel like I've been judged harshly by my brother since I relapsed. He doesn't stay in his lane, as was mentioned regarding my recovery. How do you suggest we handle people who push their way of thinking onto us and not have them abandon us if we don't do things as they see we need to?
I guess I would say take space. Like one thing, like I had a lot of trauma and the changes when I stopped being as deeply involved in AA, with like feeling like I was ostracized. And I was like, who am I if I'm not like hanging out with my sponsor and my best friends and the people that have helped me this whole way through? And I felt very alone, but I needed to take that space to figure out or sit down in the boat and like self-define where I was trying to go or what I was trying to fight for. And I think that that's true in your own personal choice. If you've chosen to design a different form of recovery for yourself, and you're talking to someone who might be early, like who might really need the rigid format, right? Like I was really attracted to the really rigid format because I really felt like I needed it to survive, and anything else that was gray area was like not going to work for me at that time in my life. And so just recognize that everyone, probably your brother's fighting his own uphill battle with himself around what he needs to, how he needs to define recovery. And that's part of the journey too. And both are okay, and it can coexist, you know, but it's painful. It can be painful, but know that there's like tons of communities online that are, whatever your style is, whatever your thing is, there's a place where you can find community around that way or that path.
Thanks, Lisa. Does anyone else want to add anything?
You know, I think I struggle with the word relapse. So I don't know if, Liv, you've heard me say this before. That's a really, really challenging word for me. I think that I had to begin to look at my relapses as lessons. I mean, because technically I relapsed every day. If I woke up every morning saying I'm not going to drink, and by the evening I was drinking, then every day I was relapsing, right? And so I think for me, I just began to look at things as lessons, and what did I learn from that experience, and I just became more what's the word, covet's not the word. Come on, Liv, help me. What's the word when you own it, you
Confident.
own your own.
You're confident, your esteem grew, right?
Right. I just owned it.
You owned who you were.
Right, I owned it. That's the word I'm looking for. And so I think in terms of your brother, having community is huge, like Lisa said, and then also giving yourself, you know, permission to own your own recovery. If you relapsed, and you know, I would question why. You know, what did I learn from that situation? What do I need to do differently? How can I? Because you got all your pieces on the board, right? It's just a matter of moving this piece here and maybe pulling this one back and giving this one a little bit more space. I think we got to just get more gentler with ourselves when we talk about relapsing. And everybody doesn't get it. You know, some people are growing like grass, and other people were growing like vines. You know what I mean? So it just depends, and giving yourself grace. And finding community, I think is a great way to do that.
Yeah, pick up put down the shame and pick up the curiosity, right? Anne and Amy, do you want to add anything, or do you want to answer the next couple of questions? No? Okay. So the next question comes from Amy, who says, what steps can we take to be more culturally competent as people who provide substance use disorder and mental health services? Well, we touched on that briefly, but I want to know if anyone wants to add any more specific. So what steps can we take to be more culturally competent as people who provide addiction services? So presumably to clinicians.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, education. I think that it starts with education. I think, when you look at some of the horrific things that have happened in 2020, I think there were a lot of organizations that made statements, whether it came out in a newsletter or it came out on a website saying, we really believe in anti-racism work, this, that, and the other. But I think what it really boils down to is action. And that action comes in the form of anti-racism training. It comes in education. I think those are two big ways that you can begin to get culturally competent, not just with your clinicians and your staff, but with your leaders too. I think it trickles down from the top. And so when the leaders become more culturally competent, it encourages those underneath to do the same. So I think it starts with education.
Agreed. And, there are so many resources for doing your own work. This is necessary as a white person, not just as a clinician. We need to understand the history of racism in this country if we want to be able to create trust providing treatment services. It's just so intertwined. Does anyone else want to add anything to that question? No? Okay, so another one is, this is the first time I've really heard about other avenues of recovery outside 12-step to this depth. What are some of the resources you recommend that I might be able to read or research? I can actually add something. I've written a couple of these blogs for Workit Health actually. And there's an extensive blog of non-12-step options that I can send out afterwards. Does anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of social media hashtags that you can follow. So like harm reduction is a hashtag. I probably am missing some that are out there, but Liv's Facebook group, where she has Life Beyond 12-Step Recovery, has a lot of people talking about new formats. Smart Recovery is another format that isn't as emphasizing the 12-step ideology. Yeah, there's a ton of great. I always look at what's going on in Philadelphia. I feel like Philadelphia is always like 10 years ahead in harm reduction. So I follow, I'll geo-search Twitter for people in Philly that are working on harm reduction because I'm always really impressed with where they're taking things.
Unity Recovery. They're a big leader in Philadelphia. They do a lot of, they still do a lot of online meetings, all pathway meetings. Amy, you mentioned, yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that for me, I started out in 12 steps, I think, as most of the people on this panel did, and it was exactly what I needed in early recovery. But as I grew, I needed more things, and I found like a Buddhist approach to be exactly what I needed, and what we talked about, like a holistic kind of approach to recovery. And so one that I would really recommend is Recovery Dharma, and they have a really active Facebook group, a great website. You can download the book for free. It's a really inclusive community. It's really queer friendly. They're doing really amazing work.
Thank you. And I know we're right on the hour, but this is a question that I think is based on someone in early recovery. So I wonder if we could just take a minute to answer this question, which is, what advice do you have for people in early recovery? What helped you most in the beginning?
For me, it was all about finding community, just finding your litter mates in whatever way you can, other people who are walking the path. Because I think other people in recovery get us in ways that other people just can't. And kind of creating your own team and your own newfound family was just the most important thing to me, because like for so many of us, and I think this has been talked about in so many ways, that like addiction is the opposite of connection, right? And so for me, recovery was all about making connections with people and learning how to be in relationship and learning how to trust. And so that was absolutely core for me, was building community.
Same. That was my big one. And the other one is to just like stop expecting anything from myself. I just literally was like, all I'm going to try to do today is not use. And I before, like I was thinking about grad school or thinking about all these other things. I was like, nope, just going to do a couple things, like not use and not use. And kept things really, really simple. I like that part of 12 step. Keep it simple and one footstep at a time kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't one day at a time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shari.
No, I had to mention, you got to think about She Recovers and all the work that they're doing for women that are recovering from all the things. And so when you think about community, you think about, just the tremendous job that they're doing, reaching women from all different issues and, talk about meeting people where they are. I think that we have to kind of look towards them in terms of community. If someone is looking for community, I think that's a great place to start. I do want to add, if there are any Black, Indigenous, or women of color here in the participants, that we do have a support group that could be helpful. I think the community is just big. You can't do enough or say enough about having a group of like-minded women or women that get it. You know what I mean? So just wanted to plug that in.
Thanks, Shari. Anne?
Ditto. That's all I'll say. Ditto.
And I would say ask for help. And you get to decide the recovery that you want, nobody else. So thanks, everyone. That was amazing. Just before we finish, do you want to pop in the chat where people can find you? I'm also happy to do like a post on Facebook's Workit page with all that information too. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their time. Put in any links there, and I could have this conversation all day. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks. This was really fun.
It was really great. We should do it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Shari. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Great to meet you, Shari and Anne.
Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful. And I just wanted to pop back on. I'm Callie from Workit Health, and we will do this again next month. Our next panel is going to be mental health and recovery. So please, everyone, join us. And we pop some links in the chat. But Liv and I will coordinate, and we'll make sure we share out kind of the resources that everyone called out on the Workit Health Facebook page, Workit Health Twitter. And if you need any more info about Workit, you can check us out at workithealth.com.
Thanks, Callie.
Thank you.